Hello, I'm Finley Brown, and this is a very special episode for SNN Sports featuring the one and only Marvin Bartley discussing his career and plenty of other things too. So stay tuned. The first thing I want to talk to you about is just what you're up to at the moment, because I have seen you just about everywhere on my screens and on my phone.
Playing a lot of paddle.
Yeah, a lot of paddle.
Yeah, losing a lot of games of paddle. No, listen, it's been a relaxing year for me. I've enjoyed it. So, as you said, I've been doing some media work, which obviously I enjoy doing that. I've managed to go across and watch a few managers and stuff as well, whether it be in Europe or down the road in England. So yeah, it's just been one of those things, kind of gathering my thoughts and probably looking over the previous 18 months as a manager, and yeah, basically getting ready for what's next. But yeah, like you said, doing a lot of media work, which helps pass the time and keeps me kind of engaged in watching football and breaking things down, really.
Do you think it's given you like a different perspective on the game, because you've had a long playing career, but you're able to sit back and watch a lot of different games, a lot of different managers and styles? Do you think you've learnt from that?
100%. I was lucky enough towards the end of my career at Livingston, I started doing some media work as well, and instantly you realise that watching those games and not having the pressure of either being on the pitch or on the sidelines definitely helps. You see it differently, and then, like you said, having to articulate it in a way where people can understand kind of what you're seeing or what you want to explain to them definitely helps. And then doing your coaching badges alongside that as well. So yeah, when you put all those things together, it should be kind of the perfect recipe. But I suppose you never know until kind of you put the bread in the oven and see if it rises.
That's a very good saying, actually. I'm gonna steal that. But you've got the manager hat on the whole time. Are you watching everything with a view to going back into the game? Because this is something we'll discuss a little bit more, but do you ever switch off from that?
No, never. I don't think you can. 100%, my aim is to go back into the game next season, whether that's as a coach, an assistant manager or a manager. I do miss being on the grass. Don't get me wrong, my life's a lot easier now. There's a lot less stress and pressure. My partner will definitely tell you that, but it's something I thrive for, Financially, does it make sense to me to do? Probably not. But as I said, there's more to life than kind of the finances behind things. It's my life. Football is my life. And even when I'm watching games now, like you said, I'm thinking about things, how I would do it or what they've done that I didn't even think of. And I'm constantly trying to learn.
I think one of the reasons that you are just about everywhere is not only your personality, but people really like the way you talk about the game, the way you translate what you're seeing as someone with a lot of experience for people to understand. I wanted to talk to you about the game itself in Scotland. And I know the aim is not always to think about it as a package, but that's kind of the reality of modern football, is how do you package up a game and sell it to people? What do you make of the kind of state of Scottish football as you're seeing it?
In terms of an overall package, it could definitely be better. I think you're seeing now on the pitch, especially teams like St Mirren, the growth that they're having in terms of finishing in the top six, in terms of getting more people to come and watch their games. And I think, Scotland as a whole, we're doing very, very well in terms of, population and the amount of people that are going to watch games of football. So in terms of that, it's absolutely flying. As a package, as I said, off the pitch, it can get better. I definitely believe that. Whether it's me doing media work and talking about other pundits and myself, include myself within that, can we do better? Can we sell our game better? 100%. And that's probably the thing now that fans are speaking about a lot. That they want to see more from us as pundits, and that's I understand that, and that falls upon my shoulders and anyone else who becomes a pundit. It's not one of those things where people want to speak about or hear you speak about things that they can get in a group chat. They want to see things or hear from your experience and what you're seeing, so they can say, "Oh, I actually didn't realise that. Now that makes sense to me." So we have to do better. I think it's far too easy to speak down of the Scottish game. I think some people do that. And I don't think it helps our growth at all. And that's something that I think going forward from next season, it has to be sorted out. And that falls upon, as I said, us as pundits.
So the game itself, your kind of former boss, David Martindale, has talked about an expanded league. And what I liked about it was not, obviously that would include Livingston, but that's not really the point of what he's talking about. The point is expanded league would be more interesting for fans. Are there any changes that you would kind of want to see in the game, just like that you've noticed that you think would improve it?
Yeah, I'm probably against the grain in terms of saying the product that we have at this moment in time. I've just spoken about St Mirren as one club there in terms of the growth that they're having on and off the pitch, which means to me, what we have at this moment in time is working. You only look at the split just going into it, and you've got Motherwell v Hearts going on. You've got St Mirren playing against Ross County. And, there's a lot of to and fro in. 1 minute Hearts are in sixth, or, Motherwell trying to then score a goal, to get ahead of them. Then St Mirren, scored to make their game 3-2. Then all of a sudden they're in the top six. You look towards the bottom of the league as well. You don't know who's going to finish in that relegation playoff. For a moment, we thought St Johnstone would cut away. Then they beat Celtic. So in terms of a product and excitement, I think it's all there. And it's one of those things, if it's not broken, why are we trying to fix it? I get, some people saying let's have 16 teams in the league, but ultimately the TV deal that we do have, they want 4 games with Celtic v Rangers. Why would they not? Because they're the best 2 teams in the country. They're the ones that bring in the most viewing figures. So in order for, us to get more money potentially from the broadcasters, you can't dilute the amount of games that we do have. And that's ultimately it. Whether you agree with it or you disagree with it, that is where they sit with it, and which makes sense for them from a financial and a business point of view. So, yeah, I'm not behind the expanding the league, if I'm totally honest. If we had to do anything you said, it's either go to 10 or we go to 14, then 100% go to 14, because going to 10 for me is going backwards. It doesn't make any sense at all to do that. But I think the product in terms of what we've got at this moment in time is very, very good. And as I said, we're going into these post-split games and there's not really any dead rubber games. Yes, Celtic are going to win the league and Rangers in second place, but outside of that, you've got Hibs, Aberdeen, Dundee United, all fighting for third place. St Mirren might think if they can go on an incredible run, can they do it? But I think they're the only team that's probably in sixth place, and they'll probably stay there, which is a massive achievement for them. But looking at the other end of the table, we don't know what's going to happen.
6 points, isn't it, between 11th and 7th?
I mean, there's a massive throw in. Hearts go into, I think Hearts played Dundee first game. If they're to lose that game, all of a sudden they're dragged into it. So even the team in 7th potentially could be dragged into that relegation playoff spot. If St Johnstone win their first couple of games, all of a sudden teams looking over their shoulder thinking we can actually be relegated here now rather than the relegation playoff spot. So, yeah, there's plenty of excitement there, I think, for everybody. And there's not many leagues around the world that have that.
You mentioned the kind of surprise that people talk down on the Scottish game. Mm-hmm. I think you had a bit of a surprise when you came up at the standards, because a lot of players talk about stats in Scotland. They think if you go up there, you're going to score or you're going to play well. That's not the case. It's actually
in any game. No, that's fine. that was never in my mindset. But no, you're totally right. Obviously, I'm from England, so a lot of people down there speak down on the game up here. But we've seen many players come up here from the English leagues and struggle and fail. And for me, that's not an ability thing. That's a mindset thing. Like you said there, coming up the road thinking, oh, this would be easy. Then all of a sudden you're in the middle of it and it's not easy. Your team are struggling. There's huge pressure on you as a player because the fans are expecting from you. And a lot of people can't deal with that. So, my mindset in terms of coming up to Scotland was, everything I do to 100%, the best of my ability. So wherever that will take me in the game, that's where it will take me. So when I came up here, there was a shock with how physical it was, but I wasn't shocked in terms of, the ability of others, because I was more worried about myself. What am I doing on the pitch? Am I affecting the game in my own way? So I think I found it easier than some. But as I said, better players have come up from England to Scotland than myself and struggled and had less success. Now, that's not an ability thing because they're a better footballer than me, but their mindsets were totally wrong. And that's something that needs to change. And you're speaking earlier about the overall package. That needs to change in terms of when people up here are speaking about the game as well, because they'll speak about games when they're down south and they have a totally different outlook and perspective on what they're seeing when the quality actually at times isn't better. So it's so important that you speak about what you see. And in terms of a player, you go into every game giving it 100%.
No, I think fans appreciated that a lot. And so, for example, you'll get players from the Premier League who come up on loan. I think they get quite a shock because you see players who are from Premier League sides come up and you assume that they'll get 10, 15 goals or they'll play really well, they'll be in team of the season. It's not the case. A lot of them struggle a lot. And it's maybe not many people would have expected kind of Sam Dalby to be up there with top scorers because he's been sent out on loan from a club in League One. Yeah. But it is a mentality thing. So, but as a player, when you came to Hibs, did you have any kind of instances? Did you notice players around you who'd come up and just not adapted at all?
Off the top of my head, maybe not within my own dressing room, where there would have definitely been some, but I'd seen players maybe come before me and in and around the same time as me at other clubs where I was thinking they actually come up here and do really, really well, and then they don't. And then, I know, having been in these environments, it's down to mindset. It's funny because a lot of people think, it's just about ability. Football's just about ability. It's not, because better players than me didn't make it as professional footballers. Going through all my youth teams, there were always players that were better than me. But I think mentally, I was stronger than them. And in terms of, my application was always at 100%. So if you speak to any of my managers when I was younger, they would say, oh, he maybe wasn't the best player, but okay, who's the top 3 hardest working? Oh, he was definitely in that. And that allows me to then transfer that to be a professional footballer. So speaking about players now coming up the road and thinking it's going to be easy, it's not a settling in thing. Like you said, it's a mentality thing. And it's so important in football because there's a lot of good players out there in terms of having attributes to be good players. There's not a lot of players that are out there mentally strong. And that's why so many have come up the road and struggled.
Well, that leads me on perfectly to something that's mentality. So I've got a list of the clubs that you played for before you got to Scotland. And I hadn't realised this because obviously I should have done my research earlier. But I've got that listed: Burnham, Hayes, Didcot Town, Hampton and Richmond Borough. Before you even came up to Scotland, before you played for Bournemouth and Burnley.
Yeah.
That speaks to someone who never gave up in their career. You, of course, you won the Isthmian Premier League.
Yeah.
But a lot of people might have thought that your career was not going anywhere, which is funny to say, given that not long after you were Scottish Cup champion.
Yeah, well, I was released, I think, from 2 of those clubs. There's actually a team I played for called Henley, which was a village team as well, right at the start. And I was released from there. So I think 3 out of the 5 teams I played for before turning professional, I was released by. And that's why, I speak about football's a game of opinions. So if those 3 managers would have been at Bournemouth at the time, they would have never assigned me. But yet a man in Kevin Bond and Eddie Howe, who was there as a coach, and Rob Newman saw something within me to sign me. And my mentality was, in terms of football, is that I might not fit into every single team because of my style of play. But there'll always be a manager out there who say, oh, I can see something within him. And then I'll get the opportunity. Then it was up for me to take it. So yeah, listen, it'd been easy for me to stop playing. It'd been easy for me when Henley Town released me when they used to have about 30 fans there and saying, oh, he's not good enough. Like, it'd been easy for me to say, I'm done with this. But as I said, my mentality was, let me always play at the highest level I possibly can. And luckily for me, that meant professional football in the end, and coming to Scotland and winning the Scottish Cup and all those other things that came with it. But yeah, as any young player, you can't give up. I saw Rory Payton did an interview yesterday and he was speaking about those same sort of things, and he's a player that I had at Queen of the South. I mean, to speak about that all the time, I say to him, yeah, you were released from Hibs when I was there as a player, but now you've got a chance to bounce back. And, you can't afford to come to this level and think, oh, that's me now, that's me done. I'll just chill out. I'm earning, a couple of £100 a week. I said, do you want to keep kicking on? And, thankfully he's managed to do that. But me, I was exactly the same. Exactly the same as that. Because like you said, it's so easy in life to give up, isn't it? So easy for someone to say, you're not good enough, and write you off and say, oh, do you know what, you're actually right. There's so many managers out there. And as I said, it was funny because when I signed for Bournemouth, I think 2 years before that, I'd been released from another non-league club. And when I signed for that football club, I did send the manager a message and say, thanks a lot for your advice and everything else, because you spurred me on now to be a football league player.
That time at Bournemouth is incredible because this is Eddie Howe, but in the early stages of his career. Did you notice something then? Like he was kind of a special manager?
Well, first he was a coach. So Eddie had to retire early. He had a bad knee injury. He was at Bournemouth and then signed for Portsmouth, and then he injured his knee. So he's then back at Bournemouth as a coach. So I think I must have been 20 when I signed there, 20 or 21. So he used to take a group of us, the younger players. So it was myself, a guy called Jason Pearce, Charlie Austin used to come in from time to time because he was a part-time player at that moment, and a few others. And you could see that, he was very, he articulated himself very, very well. He always demanded from you day in, day out. But he was also one of those managers that if you were doing something wrong, he could explain to you what you were doing wrong, and then he would help you work on it when training had finished. But yeah, listen, Eddie had one of those roles. As I said, he was a coach. Then Kevin Bond got sacked, and Eddie was down doing the under-13s. That was his job when we had Jimmy Quinn as manager. And then he bounced back from that, So he was almost told, you're not going to have to be on my coaching team. He goes to under-13s, and he bounced back to be our first team manager. And like I said, the rest is history. But no, he was brilliant. As I said, you take a lot of things from managers that you've worked with that do things really, really well. And, he's one of them that I'm still in contact to this day. And he's been a massive help for me.
Did you notice a massive progression in your game? Because it's easy to imagine that once you're set, once you reach adulthood, your football ability, it's not going to change much. But did you feel like you kept developing, not only as a player, but kind of in your mental skills?
Yeah, I think an experience-wise as well. You go yourself into situations in a match where you're like, I've done this before, I've seen this before. So experience definitely helps. And like you say, mentality, it's the key to everything. People think, like you said there, just becoming a professional footballer, that's the easy bit. But, realising you have to rest. You can't go out with your friends, making sacrifices, all of these things that I did when I was in non-league, I had to continue doing when I was a professional footballer, because that's normally when it changes for people. They're like, oh, I've made it now. So all these things that I've
stop,
done,
kind of.
yeah, they stop doing the right things. It's like, oh no, I've made it now. That's it. You know, I can go to nightclubs every Saturday night now. I can buy a table. I can walk to the front and be on the guest list because I'm the main man. No one's going to tell me any different. But yeah, you have to keep making the same sacrifice because it gets harder. Yeah. Because especially for me, it got harder because I began to put more pressure on myself. You know, each week, each season, I put more and more pressure on myself to be that main man, to be the best version of myself, because I knew how easy it was to go from being a professional back to non-league, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go back and work at Sports Direct. You know, I didn't want to go back to being a double glazed fitter. I didn't want to go back to doing all those things, and that's not being disrespectful to anyone who does those jobs. But being a professional footballer is a lot better.
Yeah, but you knew what you wanted. Like for some people, that's the kind of perfect balance. Not a lot of people love football enough or want it enough to just do one of them, but like, to kind of, do you think that was to your detriment, or do you think that was a benefit, that pressure? Because it seems like a lot to put on yourself.
But that's how I work.
Yeah.
You know, that's the only thing that can make me get up in the morning and have to go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then after work I'm finishing at 4:30, whatever, I'm having something to eat, and I'm driving an hour and a half to go and train. You know, those pressures, I'm not wanting to go back to that. Yeah. I have to keep on doing that. I have to keep on driving myself forward, because if I forget where I came from and how hard it was and the struggle it was to get to this position, it's so easy to go back. So easy to go back. And I think it gives you life skills as well, because in terms of when you're earning more money, you invest it rather than spending it, because you're thinking, you know, after football, I don't know how long it was going to last. I don't want to go back to that position where I have to do a job that I don't want to do. And that was something I always try to say to my players: never be, you know, in a position when you're my age after your career's finished and you're thinking, oh no, I need to get a job right now. And you have to go into something that you don't want to do. Because football should be a head start. Yeah. And that's the way I saw it. It was a head start for me in terms of a financial head start, because you earn good money over a short period of time. But how can I maximise that money that I do earn? And how can I maximise the investments that I am making at that moment in time? Because everything else will take care of itself.
The way you talk about it is like you're not an anomaly. I think that's not how most people think. I think very different to other footballers. Mm-hmm. The move up to Scotland. Yeah. You're now, I would say, an honorary Scot. Yeah. But was that a shock to you?
Yeah.
Like, you mentioned the physicality of it all, but was it strange? Like
it was strange even coming up, because I'd been at Leyton Orient. I was at Burnley, I went to Leyton Orient on loan, and then they signed me permanently. And I don't mind saying it was at a time where the club put an awful lot of money into it. But it was kind of a car crash behind the scenes. Yeah, I think we had 6 managers over the course of 2 seasons, and you know, a lot of things were going on. And I came out at 29 and I was like, I'm not sure this is for me anymore. It kind of deflated me with what I was seeing, and I was in a dressing room when a majority of the people didn't really want to be there, and there wasn't that kind of that team spirit, that kind of family thing, which you get in, you know, a lot of good dressing rooms, and the hard work just wasn't there. And we ended up getting relegated with a budget that was a championship budget. We were in League One. So we'd gone from, you know, 2 years prior to that being in a playoff final at Wembley to then, you know, having new owners, etc., and then getting relegated. So, yeah, I didn't know what was next. You can probably tell I like challenges in life. I need something to get me going. Yeah, exactly. Paddle, yeah. One that I'm losing, that's a challenge I'm losing at. But to put some fire in my belly, you know, I need something. And, you know, I had a couple of options down in England, and, you know, got to July and I was just like, I'm not sure I want to do anything anymore. It didn't
connect with you?
Yeah, it didn't really, you know, excite me. And then Graham Matthew gave me a call about coming up here. Alan Stubbs was a manager. You know, had a couple of conversations, and, you know, I have to thank Graham massively, because without him just saying, just come up, just have a look, etc., it would have never happened. Because at first, like you said, I wasn't interested. So I flew up. Graham was actually meant to meet me. It's a funny story considering what we were speaking about. Graham actually wrote his car off coming to pick me up, so he had to send a guy called Gav, who's still at the club now, in a minibus to pick me and my brother up. So yeah, he came and got us, and they took me to the training ground, and I was like, the facilities at HTC are unbelievable. Took me to the stadium, and I was sold. You know, I remember having a conversation with Liam Fontaine, who was obviously born down the road, but he was been at Bristol City and he'd moved up here, and we'd spoken about it. He's like, listen, Stubbsy lets you go home if you need to go home, etc., as long as you don't take the mick. So all of those things kind of aligned with where I was at, and, you know, seeing the city as well, I was like, no, this is definitely something I can do. And, then signing for them. So yeah, it was brilliant. As I said, Graham, Matthew, and both my brothers, I have to thank them. Because if it wasn't for them, I probably wouldn't have done it, and I wouldn't be sitting here now in front of you.
Well, you say your brothers, did they give you a push to come up? Were you?
Yeah, I was done. I'll be honest. I was done at 20. I was done because, as I said, you spoke about my pathway into football and how hard I had to work. Then being around a majority in the dressing room who didn't care about what we were doing, that didn't sit well with me. That wasn't what I dreamt of doing. That wasn't football for me. So yeah, that they had to have a conversation. I actually had to thank one of my other brothers who got me to Burnley on deadline day to actually sign for Burnley before the Leyton Orient stuff, because it was deadline day. I think we had 3 hours to get from Reading to Manchester, and somehow he got me there with no points on the licence or anything like that. So yeah, he drove my car, to be fair. So if anyone would have been getting in trouble, it would have been me. But again, I have to thank him for that. But yeah, in terms of when I was being done at 29, they said to me, like, remember, where you were at like 19, how you felt about the game, etc. Don't let these 2 years put you off. And as I said, they spoke me into it. Graham Maffey did the same, and obviously coming up here was absolutely brilliant, and I'm thankful to all of them, because I wouldn't have had the experience that I have had in Scotland otherwise.
Well, if anything, you would have been an example, just with your career, footballing career alone, to players who are released. You weren't released, but players are released from Premier League, Championship, go down to non-league. They're still incredibly talented players, but like we talked about earlier, it's like you fall away from the game, but if you just kind of keep applying yourself and kind of don't let that happen, you can actually make a good career out of football, even if it's not at the highest level.
Yeah.
But then you do achieve something that not many people get to do, and that's winning the Scottish Cup.
Yeah.
And this was not, when you arrived, the best Hibs team we'd ever seen. I think they were lower than they should have been.
Yeah.
They weren't doing this, but that is an achievement that people still talk about today, and probably will for decades.
Yeah, until the club do it again. But yeah, like even coming up here, it was one of those things that I remember I'd been picked up and I was getting shown around, houses, etc., etc. So after I'd signed, and I was speaking to the taxi driver, and I was like, it's so important that we get promoted again. We're in the Championship. And he's like, no, it's not. I was like, what do you mean, no, it's not? Of course it is. That's why I'm here. I'm here to get promoted. And he's like, no. The important thing is to win the Scottish Cup. And that was the first time that I knew anything about, the club not winning it for over 100 years, etc., etc. And I was like, oh, that's a bit weird. Like, surely you want to get promoted. So again, the fire was relit in me after seeing, the city and seeing the training ground and the stadium and the size of the club. But then that's something else again. So the flame gets even bigger, and you're like, right, how do we do this? How do we go about doing this? And then you realise that you've got Celtic and Rangers that are in the same cup as you. You're like, this could be difficult. But yeah, to achieve that, and I speak about dressing rooms, that was the opposite of the Leyton Orient dressing room. That was a real tight dressing room. And don't get me wrong, we had players that were a little bit older, like myself, Liam Fontaine, Darren McGregor, and you had the younger boys, the Martin Boyles, Jason Cummings, Danny Hanlon's, of this world. But they knew when it was time to be serious. It was self-policed. Alan Stubbs would tell you that, Neil Lennon would tell you that, who came in after. Dressing room was self-policed because we knew when it was time to work. We knew when it was time to have a laugh and a joke, and we would do that. But, when it was time to get going, we knew that. And we had each other's back as well, whether it was on the pitch, whether it was in the tunnels, whether, wherever it was, we always had each other's back. And that was a thing that I think, one, won us the Scottish Cup, but two, got us promoted. And, we got to have a few games in the European qualifiers as well. But yeah, that was a special dressing room.
You mentioned the European qualifiers. It's, they're not maybe the group stages, but still, Europe is so far removed from where you were not that long ago.
Yeah.
Did you ever have that feeling of, I've made it? Did you ever have even something close to that? Like you've actually reached a level that you're quite happy with, that you're proud of?
No, I probably had more imposter syndrome than...
Really?
Yeah, than thinking, this is me having made it. I don't think I'll ever look back on anything I've achieved in life until, I'm sitting on the beach somewhere and I'm retired. I genuinely don't, because I don't know, I always see the picture after the Scottish Cup when we did the parade and stuff, and it takes me back every so often, when you see it. But I don't think I'll ever really appreciate that and those feelings and everything else that came with it until I'm actually just chilling out and I'm like, right, I'm done with football now. I'm just going to watch football as a fan. Because I think if it comes to that day too soon, the fire in me's gone. That's me telling myself, do you know what? find something else, try and become a professional paddle player or something.
Yeah, but that's maybe that's the trade-off for some people between kind of ambition. Like that's what you maybe have to give. But do you feel that about management and media?
Yeah,
is that
definitely.
something you share? Like,
yeah, 100%. You know, regardless of what I do media-wise, whether it be, you know, on the radio, whether it be a live game, you know, I do an awful lot of studying. You know, my missus will tell you that. I watch, you know, I've done games in League One this season, for example, and I've watched the previous 4 games of both teams because I want to be able to offer you something, not just from a guy going there, watching a game and speaking about it. I want to have some insight in terms of what's going on. If I know players that have played against the team or that are on the team, I'll speak to them because that's my duty to do it. Again, I can't freewheel into things. You know, there has to be some resistance. I have to be thinking, right, I'm doing something, I'm achieving something, I'm doing something maybe that somebody else might not be able to do, or I'm giving myself the best opportunity to do that. Who knows? Maybe I'm not as good as anybody else. Maybe I'm the worst out of everybody, but I can only be the best version of myself. And that's what I constantly tell myself no matter what I do. So when it comes to the media stuff, that's exactly it. When it's about managing or coaching, that's exactly the same thing. And listen, people have an opinion on both. You know, sometimes you'll say something and people will disagree with you. But I think what people have realised about me now, I don't have a narrative. Yeah. I say it as I see it. Whether it's about my own team, Hibs, whether it's about anybody else, I say it as I see it. And if they challenge me, whether it be on Twitter or radio phone-in, I'll explain to them my reason for saying something. And you know what? After that conversation, they might say, I'd still disagree with them. But they understand my point of view, where I was coming from with it. And that's just my opinion on it. You know, I'm not a pundit because I know absolutely everything about the game, but I'm just there to give my opinion. And as I said, you know, that sometimes you agree with it, sometimes you won't agree with it, but you know, that's football. There would never be a narrative behind it. It's just how I see the situation.
But that's exactly what the game needs, is like a conduit, because you don't want the walls up between fans and the professional game. And so by opening yourself up to arguments and conversations, even like you said, if one of you ends up thinking, I've not changed my mind, at least that conversation is happening. And at least they're learning a little bit more, whether they like it or not. Whereas, you know, a lot of people might think that they tune in and they're just getting the kind of same thing every time. At least you're giving them that insight. So when you say maybe you're the worst in the lineup, obviously not true, because that's why you're booked everywhere. And that's why you've done us a massive favor coming here. But before we move on to the post-playing, there's something I wanted to know about is the time at Livingston, and in particular, David Martindale, because I would say you are what I would describe as a disciple of the school of Martindale. Because every so often we bump into people like Dougie Imrie, and it's just his coaching staff and his playing group, it's a litany of people that go on to do great things in the game. And not really people pay attention to that, what he's done in helping people make that transition. What was he like for you? How could you describe him as a character?
It's fiery. Obviously, you know, I went in at first as a player. And then I was captain before then being assistant manager. So, you know, one thing I was always with Davey, I'm just honest. You know, sometimes that would get me in trouble with him. Sometimes it would get me shouted at. Sometimes he would agree with me. Sometimes he would disagree with me at first and then call me and agree. And sometimes he just disagree with me. But I think he always respected that was just the way that I was. And, you know, we still speak now. Livingston's a unique football club in terms of the people that are there. You know, you've got Cheb, the kit man, who doubles up in terms of doing S&C from time to time. You've got Andy, the physio, who, you know, does that side of things, but does everything else that you could possibly think of. They all help. You know, you've got Mo, the cook, everyone. You've got Karen in the office. It's such a brilliant football club, and it's unique in terms of, you know, giving people opportunities. You know, I was coming towards the end of my career, then I was, you know, put in with the reserves in terms of being a manager there, and then I step up to be assistant manager. So I will forever be grateful to Dave and the football club for allowing me to do that. You know, Dougie Imrie went from being a youth coach at Hamilton to then being a coach at Livingston before, you know, then moving on. But as I said, you know, you've got a minimal number of staff, but everyone pulls in the same direction. You know, you look at Dave back now as a CEO there. When I first started, he was just a media guy, you know, but he's worked ever so hard to get to now being a CEO. And I'm not saying he was just a media guy, but that was his job. You know, he did it really, really well. And then all of a sudden he's CEO of the football club now. He's just, you know, won a trophy. So yeah, listen, great people there. It wasn't a club that was about one individual. Everyone was pulling in the same direction. And ultimately Davey was at the top of that because he was a manager of it. But, you know, so many people did so many things there. And, a club that was constantly, punching above its weight. And I love my time there as a player. I love my time there as an assistant manager. And, hopefully the club can now get back to the Premier League again.
Yeah, so I hope so. It's funny to say not a lot of people give it the respect I think it deserves because they don't always fill out the ground and there's the artificial pitch. But it is, like you mentioned, everyone pulls in. Everyone gets essentially thrown in at the deep end to help make that club work. And it shouldn't be where it is, realistically. And they've had so many setbacks. But it helped you make that transition, would you say, to management? Because Queen of the South is, it's a big club in name and it represents, in a way, that kind of part of Scotland, Dumfries and Galloway. What was that experience like? You said you managed the reserves, but could anything prepare you for a job like that?
Listen, I think maybe from the age I was very lucky, maybe 25, I was thinking about what was next. And it was wanting to go into management. I wanted to go into coaching or management. So I started to do my badges, really, really early. So it wasn't something that I got to 33 and thought, oh, what's next? That's something I was always preparing for. So, writing down sessions when I was 25, 26 and so on helped me prepare for one day being a manager. And you always have these things. So but then going into Queen of the South, it's obviously not a lot lower level, but in terms of the finances, it was a lot different. If I compare it to what I was earning non-league, I was earning clear of what the top earners at Queen of the South were earning. But it's something that will help me go on in life 100%. And it's fantastic. First went into the football club. We won 9 out of 15 games the first season, and the budget wasn't great, but I was using the old manager's budget. We did some dealing in January. I got a couple of players in on loan, and we've gone from 12 points outside the playoffs to finishing within 3 points of the playoffs. To make that turnaround in 15 games was massive. I think they had 22 points when I went in there. We finished on like 53 or 54. The following season, all of a sudden, the budget goes down a little bit. And it's massive, at that level. I know a lot of managers speak about budgets, but my players are earning between £150 a week, and outside of two boys who are on £600 a week, they're between £150 and £500 a week. Now, we were speaking off camera, the minimum wage is now £25,000. So you have to think, when I'm going to try and now sign players that are over the age of 21, 22 years of age and they're in full-time work, their starting point as well. I earn £480, say, a week from work. I earn £300 playing in the same league. So that's £780. And I'm saying to them, I can only offer you £500, for example. They're having to take a pay cut to come and be full-time. And that's what a lot of fans don't understand. So, there's a real small pool of players that you're able to attract, because you've got domestically the top tier, so tier 1, they all go to the Premier League. And then you've got, boys in tier 2 that will be in the Championship, etc. And then I had, the first year was Dunfermline, who I think lost 1 game all season. And then the second season, we had Falkirk, who went unbeaten for the whole season, teams like Hamilton. So the rest of the full-time players are kind of going there. And then you've got part-time boys that, as I said, if they're in full-time work already, you're not getting the best of the part-time players. You're going to have to look at Team of the Year now, this season in League One. I think it's maybe 9 or 10 part-time players. Our both have won the league as a part-time team. And that's with Queen of the South having probably a 50% bigger budget this year than I had. So it was very difficult to recruit players. You had to take some boys maybe that you have to take risks on, in terms of not footballing ability, but as I spoke a lot about mentality, that was probably lacking with some of them. Don't get me wrong, not all of them. You had the older boys, Paul Mackay, Josh Todd, Gavin Riley, who took care of themselves. Jordan Houston, those players took care of themselves. But it was difficult, So in the second season, my thinking was, right, we need to create a team that's maybe hard to beat, defensively sound. But I was losing my top scorer in Rory Payton, who then went to Queen's Park. So I tried to sign Roman Barrell, don't mind saying it. He was getting released from Falkirk. I think we got up to maybe £700 to offer him, and Cove just came and blew us out of the water. He ended up being a top goal scorer in that league that season. So I think we finished with the third best defence in the league last season, but we were second in terms of the missing the best chances, which basically meant we're missing somebody at the top end. So it was one of those things, and there's this perceived thing, you're a full-time team, you should be up here in the league, but you're not getting, you can't sign the best part-time players. So it doesn't matter if you're full-time or not. For example, if I'm falling down the leagues at 34, 35, I'm going to a part-time team that are offering me £400, and if I work minimum wage job, I'm on £25,000 a year. All of a sudden, that's £880 a week I'm getting. If you offer me £400 or £500 to be full-time, why am I going to take that? And that's me as a player.
With a family, presumably a lot of people
of course,
have
yeah.
mouths to feed. That's the reality.
Yeah, or they're trying to get on the property ladder. So you're asking people, okay, I can match what you're getting from your part-time team, but you have to take a £25,000 a year pay cut. How many people are going to do that? Do you know what I mean? So there's a small pool of players you can get. We got lucky with some in terms of boys who have been released from bigger academies who were trying to use that as a stepping stone, which was always my selling point. This is a stepping stone. This isn't the be-all and end-all. This money isn't going to make you rich. It's probably not even going to give you a head start. Got boys who are older and have been full-time for a long time, and they probably want to see out the last couple of years of being full-time. And then you had some that just didn't want to get jobs. So do you know what I mean? And listen, you talk about the overall package of games and boys coming out of academies. I'll give you a story about one player that we had there that just couldn't be on time. He came from a massive, massive academy, and he was just never on time. And I'd constantly have conversations with him, like, you need to get here on time. Like, if you go into the big wide world and you're getting a job and you're constantly late, etc., etc. And he couldn't grasp that idea. And he was a good footballer. Yeah. Like, ability-wise, he was a good footballer, but he just couldn't do the hard yards in football that you have to do. And I remember having a conversation with him. I think we had finished training on the Monday, and Dan Armstrong, brilliant guy, he's CEO now at Queen of the South. He used to do the reserves as well, another club that people used to double up with jobs. He messaged me on the Monday and said, I can't do the reserve game the next day. So me and Grant Murray said, well, we'll go and do the game, but we're going to start training at 10 o'clock the next day. So Grant straight away sent out a message into the group chat, training's to start at 10. Now, normally players have to be in for 10 for a half 10 start. So anyway, Tuesday comes, everyone's out there except for this one player. So we're like, what's going on here? Like, where is he? He comes rocking in the car park at 20 past 10. So he's already 20 minutes late for a normal day, but training's now started. So he comes, sorry, Gaffer, I didn't see my phone, etc., etc. Now he's in a car school with the other boys. So they've all seen it. They've messaged, he's just not replied. So I'm like, right, fine, let's get training done. So he comes in after, again, this used to happen a lot. I'm speaking to boys about being professional, all these other things. I'm saying, like, you can't afford to do this. This is going to cost you your career. You started at a big academy. You're now at League One. We're the lowest paying full-time club in the whole country. So there's nowhere to go after this.
It's just part of the game, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Or you're going to be a part-time footballer, and that's not where you want to be. You can't be in an academy your whole life, and then this happened. So he's like, right, I apologise, but I just didn't see my phone. So he's trying to convince me now. I messaged my mum, I'm 63, right? I saw my mum on WhatsApp. Within 15 minutes, she's seen it. Yeah. So he's trying to convince me between 3 o'clock on a Monday and 8 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, he's not seen the WhatsApp. Whatever, it is what it is. So I used to have a rule that you can't take your phone into the gym for obvious reasons. So we used to print off what they needed to do, etc. So I was like, right, because you're late, you're in gym group 3, which is with the injured boys. You go across there to the strength and conditioning coach. Goes across there, strength and conditioning coach comes back. I said, oh, how was the gym? He said, oh, player X was constantly on his phone. So I'm like, what? So this is the same player I've spoken about that has been late, etc., etc. Yeah. Exactly, never on his phone. So I'll then call him up, say, right, come back, I want to speak to you. And I say to him, why are you on your phone? He's like, oh, I was checking my group chat. And I was like, but I thought you don't use WhatsApp. I was like, who are you messaging? Your friends should be at work. And he's like, they are at work, but we've got a night out at the weekend. And I was just checking through the group chat to see what they had been saying. So I said, so for your actual place of work, you don't check WhatsApp, but now you want to check it when you should be doing the gym. And that kind of something, so many things, I saw so many things at that level that I'd never seen in football throughout my whole career. And they're brilliant boys. I still speak to them now, and it's good to see, because I actually said to him, you've got a big car out there, an expensive car. Who's going to pay for that if you're no longer in football? And this is when I knew I was hitting my head against a brick wall. He said, oh, my mum and dad will pay for it. And I was like, yeah. But the thing with him is that his mum and dad are hard-working people. They work 9 to 5s. And lo and behold, I saw this player maybe 6 weeks ago, and he was with one of his teammates. I said, has he still got that car? And his mate was like, no, he had to get rid of it. And I was like, but I knew this was going to happen. So, hopefully it's life lessons for them. Yeah. As I said, people from the outside can sit and say, oh, you should be doing this, this, and this, because you're a full-time team. Ultimately, you're getting players, if they're on a part-time level, they're getting £200, £300 a week, and you'll be able to bump them up a little bit. That's it. So you're not getting the best of the part-time players. Probably not even getting the mid part-time players. You're getting mid to bottom half of part-time players. The majority. You get a few that you get lucky with, the top end, the older boys, a couple of boys that have been full-time, and they're trying to kick on again. But ultimately, I would say 12 of my squad are probably made up of those sorts of players who, you know, aren't at that level because of ability, but they just don't have the mentality to do it. And if you don't marry the two things up, I always say I'd rather have boys that have a better mentality and less ability than more ability and no mentality.
But that's such a kind of learning curve for you. And what we mentioned off air is the gist of it is, and a lot of fans don't like to talk about it, is wage bill usually tends to equal, it's like XG, it tends to equal where you're going to finish in the league. So for you to finish, the way I would say judge manager of the season is who outperformed where their wage bill says they should be, realistically, because that means they did a lot better than they should have. So your time at senior Queen of the South, excuse me, shows that you've kind of got a lot of potential in the game. And a lot of people, the worry for me is a lot of managers fall out of the game after their first job. But you seem to be very close, to going back into it. You did the pro license, so you're well on track to kind of coming back in, and you've still got that passion, you've still got that fire that you talked about.
And listen, I've been very, very lucky. You know, I spoke to 2 clubs down in England about taking under 21s. I was offered one of the roles, but when I came out, I said to my missus in maybe the January or February that I wanted a year out of this, because as you can tell, as a person, I'm fully invested in things. So it wasn't just what I was doing at work, it was coming home. I was clipping games up, I was sending stuff to individuals. I was trying to do absolutely everything I could in order to give them the best chance of winning a game of football on a Saturday. Now, if you're not giving that back to me, or a majority I don't feel are giving that back to me, it makes things nearly on impossible, because it's affected my family life. I'm missing family parties down in England. I'm missing all these sorts of things to give you guys an opportunity, and you're giving me nothing. All I want is a buy-in from you to be the best version of yourself. If you're not willing to give that to me, as I said to my missus, that would be it. And I always say this, you know, it's a bigger achievement for me keeping that team up that last season than it was the season beforehand, closing that gap on the playoff spot. Because ultimately, like you said there, if you had a list of what every player earns, whether it's from work and football or just football, we'd be last, cut adrift. And they're seeing the same this season. You know, as I said, 50% upscale in terms of what they're paying wage-wise. So they've got a much bigger budget, but Arbroath still going to win the league. Because you still got boys like, you know, Muirhead or Ryan Flynn, these older boys that they're not going to come and play for you. Yes, you can offer now £1,200 a week, for example, rather than the £600 a week we were offering. If they're getting £800 to be part-time, spend more time with their family and they're doing things alongside it, they'd rather still do that. So yeah, listen, definitely. And as I said, you know, I was offered 2 jobs in Scotland during this season that have just gone. I'm lucky enough. So yeah, it's still. You're not interested? You didn't take. I said to myself again, I'm so hard-headed in terms of, you know, my missus told you that I said I was having a year off. So for me to go back in and imagine like 2 weeks in, I'm like, oh, do you know what? I said to myself, I was having a year off. What am I doing here? And again, it's allowed me to grow as a person. Yeah. It's allowed me to grow in terms of doing other things. It's allowed me to go and watch different managers on the continent. It's allowed me to go down the road and watch different managers. And I'm talking about top tier managers. So all of those things is exactly how I want this year to pan out. Yeah. And now when it gets to the next season, as I say, whether it's a coach, assistant or manager, I'll be going back into the game. I'll be trying to go back in. I don't care about levels. Yeah. I'm not saying I want to go to, I don't care. I'll help my local team out if I need to. I'm just going to get back on the grass.
Who have you been watching?
I'll be on a name dropping lads, but this, that, and the other. Some very, very, very good managers that I've played under before. Okay. You know, and people that I've met on certain licenses or through certain groups or whatever else. So, yeah, been to top league in France, for example, to go and watch. You know, I went abroad and watched the managers now managing back in Scotland, so it won't be hard to work out. I went to see him. You know, went down to a few clubs down in England as well on numerous occasions. It's allowed me to get on the grass as well with 21s and stuff as well, which has been brilliant. So yeah, I'll probably say six or seven people I've been to see over this past year, which I've never had the opportunity to do that.
And so a lot of people kind of love this idea of footballing philosophy because essentially it's a way to sell yourself as a manager, is to subscribe to something. But is that something you're interested in? Is footballing identity or DNA?
Win.
In terms of management, yeah.
That's just win.
Just win.
Just win. Just win. Obviously, you want to play football in a certain way. And as I said, when we won that 9 out of 15 games, I had a group of players, again, where the budget was still miles off other teams, but there was still enough within that group. I'd taken over from the previous manager and we've added a few players to it. And if I'd been able to keep that squad together financially, I could have afforded it. Then I would have done so, you know. But unfortunately, I couldn't afford to do it. And then you're taking more risk. But you know, as I said, the only comparable thing for anyone is what did the manager do before me that season, and what did I do? You know, when things began to get cut, and listen, as it got towards the end of the season, I'm hearing, you know, people are saying, "Oh, well, this youth player, my son's in this youth team, and I'm going to be putting X amount of money into the club next season, so these youth players should be in the team." And I'm like, no, you have no experience of football. It doesn't matter if you're putting any money into a football club. That there is no kind of, this is not Sunday League.
Hate to play.
That's what I mean. And when I start to hear those sorts of things, I'm like, do you know what? This isn't for me. You know, you go forward and do what, and that's where the budget's had to go as big as it has, and it still potentially might not. And I hope it does. There's some brilliant people at that football club. Genuinely, you know, I can't speak highly enough of the chairman. When I was there, of Craig, Patterson, of Mark, you know, those three there, magical people. And there's one thing, you know, I speak about the budget, they cut their cloth accordingly. You know, that club will always be there. The chairman's putting a lot of money over the years. Those two, Craig and Mark as well, putting a lot of money over the years. And they got to a point where, you know, it's their money, you know, why should they continue to do it? They have to be self-sufficient. And, you know, someone else has come in now and want to put a bit of money into it, but how long does that last? If I don't go up into the Championship, does he do it again next season? I'm unsure. But yeah, I do hope they go up, because I said there's a lot of brilliant people within that football club, you know, that I still speak to now. That, you know, fantastic individuals.
Because you played with David.
I played with Dave, yeah. I played with Dave.
First start of the season, when things were going badly, did you think it was a mistake, or did you always know that things were going to turn around?
No, I didn't expect it to be the turnaround that there has been, but Hibs have got an extremely strong squad. You know, when you look at the actual squad of players, and, you know, Dave was right in terms of what he's saying, individuals will make a mistake, and as a manager, there's nothing you can do about that. You know, if an individual makes a mistake, then you can do all the coaching throughout the week, you can do all the analysis work you want to do. Sometimes people just make mistakes, and it kept coming. It's like a snowball effect. One player would do it, then it'd be another player, then a player would get sent off.
Well.
Exactly. It was costing them, and then they had that kind of turnaround at Aberdeen. But when you look at the squad of players, you know, and Dave and Eddie May, who's, you know, been massive for Dave as well, it was always going to turn around. Hibs were never going to get relegated. People talking about Hibs getting relegated, that was never going to happen. You know, it just wasn't. You know, so as I said, the turnaround that they've been on has been unbelievable. Did I expect the turnaround to be as big as that? No. But I knew they would always be safe, and listen, top six. So I always expected them to be in the top six. Now they're in third place, and, you know, it's theirs kind of to lose.
You do Hibs commentary, don't you?
Yeah, at time. Yeah.
Who is your Hibs player of the season so far?
I think Nicky Cannon's been brilliant. Obviously, he's had his injuries, but I think he's been brilliant. I think Rocky Bashiri coming back into the team and changing to a back three from a back four has really helped him. And I think he's been, you know, ever so strong at the back for them. So yeah, I'd probably say, you know, those two, and Trent again as well. He's been brilliant in the centre midfield. And talking about a player that came up last season and I think struggled. Yeah. I think he would admit that. But playing at centre half at times, he's a centre midfielder for me. He's gone from strength to strength this season. So yeah, probably one of those three. And a lot of people have said to me, "Are you surprised they're not in Player of the Year?" I'm not, because being a player, that people also remember what happened at the start of the season. So it's very difficult to put, say, a Nicky Cadden in ahead of a James Penrice. Where James Penrice, for Hearts, in terms of his own individual performances, have been consistent. Yeah. You know, Hibs struggled at the start. Nicky Cadden's came in, and he's definitely helped. He's been brilliant, you know, playing left wing back for them. So I do understand why the players aren't in there, because of the way they started, maybe from start of the season until November.
And you expect, so David Gray, obviously the new contract. Mm-hmm. You're expecting them kind of push for the European places at this point. Is that the minimum now? If you were a Hibs fan, it's like maybe third.
Yeah, I am a Hibs fan. So the minimum at the start in November was just, please don't go down. Yeah. But no, listen, when you're in third place, and listen, they're in the split now. I think with Aberdeen away on Saturday, you know, being a big game for them. But yeah, you hope for third place. Listen, if you can get third place, it'd be unbelievable season, especially the way we started. So yeah, you know, I really would hope for third, but the bare minimum was top six, and they've achieved that. And, you know, now it's about, you know, can you hold on to that third place?
What would you say? I'll ask you one more thing about this season in particular. Mm. What has been the most surprising thing, bar Hibs, about this season?
Probably Aberdeen. Yeah. In terms of the way that they did start, and then the way they kind of fell away, and now they've kind of found themselves again. Again, another team that were bottom six last season, but they still have a chance for third place. They're in the Scottish Cup final. So football's so strange, isn't it? Because I think they're 3 points behind Hibs, and people were questioning Jimmy Tilleen, and then we're just speaking about David Gray there because of the run that they've been on. But when you look over the course of the whole season, which is where kind of people are judged, that they've both had, for me, really, really good seasons, and hopefully, Hibs just put them to the post in terms of third place. But people, speaking about manager of the season, it has to be Brendan Rodgers, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, Steve Robinson's another one for me at St Mirren. We talk about budgets. Three top sixes in a row. Yeah, with the budget that's probably 10th, 11th in the league.
He lost so many players at the start of the season.
But they always do.
To use Olasanya.
Olasanya's gone now. He's gone to the MLS. Yeah. So you always use their best players. That's just the way it works. So he's a manager for me that I'm just like constantly punching above his weight in a top flight, doing it. So he's another one. But yeah. People say, oh yeah, but it's expected of Celtic. The hardest thing in football is to win games. Listen, I've been in teams that lose games consistently and have won games consistently. I'm telling you, it's a lot harder to keep on winning than it is to keep on losing. Because all of a sudden, if you're losing, people say, they just lost again, that's all right. Get into that.
Well, did Cal McGregor come out and say people have become desensitised to their success? You agree with that?
100%. And that's something I've been saying, sometimes as football fans, we just expect it. Nothing in football is given to you. No matter how good you are, you might be better than the other team. We see it in the Champions League at the top tier that the underdogs, they win games from time to time. So to consistently perform at the level that those players do, take it anything else, so they have to be on their game because Celtic is a cup final for so many teams in the league. So many teams. Exactly. Every week they're playing against somebody. It's like, I was at Livingston, that's your cup final. Playing against Rangers, that's your cup final.
Well, St John's beat them 1-0 last week. They played like a final, and that took so much out of them that as soon as they got to Hampden.
Exactly that. And then it gets to Hampden and it flips. But yeah, we've just become expecting players to be robots. It's not easy what those players do. I can tell you that for nothing.
I'll take your word for it. Can you tell me, for a bit of insight, as someone who's never going to get on the pro licence course, what is that like? Because there are some big names in the game. Leanne Crichton, Dougie Imrie. You've got kind of very promising managers, including yourself. Yeah,
Dougie, big name, small guy. Yeah. Stephen Whittaker's on there. This is on my cohort. Don Cowie's on mine as well. Brian Kerr, who's assistant at St Mirren, just to name a few. So yeah, listen, it's brilliant. The Scottish FA have put together a really, really good group and a brilliant course and. It's coming towards the end of it now, but so much has been learnt. We got to go away to the European Championships, the under-21s in Romania, which was absolutely fantastic. And, I always think about these courses, do you come away from them and have you learnt anything? And on this course, we definitely have. Greg Patterson's lined up Jose Mourinho to speak to us next Thursday on a Zoom as well, which is brilliant, Yeah, I've got to get them in by today, actually. So after this, I'll be sending Marion the email. But yeah, listen, it's brilliant. You've got Scott Gemmell there as well on the course. Dougie Anderson's on the course. So yeah, listen, and it's so good because it's not just about what you do on the course, but if you want to speak to Scott about football outside of it, it's having a conversation with a man who's on a 21 manager, but playing at the highest level, etc. He's got so much time for you. And those things, they're the small things that make the big differences for me. Having spoken to other people who've done pro licenses with different FAs, they don't have that kind of same feeling that I believe that I've got from this one. So yeah, listen, courses are expensive, yeah, but they're worth it, and I'd advise anyone to get on the courses, whether it be starting out, whether it be BA, whatever else, pro license if you're lucky enough to get on it. For me, it's been excellent.
Have you got even privately a kind of career, a management plan mapped out for yourself, like targets?
Yeah, but there's no point me looking at the last target if I can't achieve the first target. So the next thing for me, as I said, to get back in the game, whether that's coach and assistant manager or manager, if I never manage again, I just want to be in football. Yeah. It's not one of those things. I just want to be back in the game. Obviously, the pinnacle of it for me is managing, but if I'm an assistant, I understand what my role is as an assistant. I'm not going to be an assistant that tries to overstep, what I should be doing or how I should be, carrying myself, or if the manager says this thing and then, because trust is a massive thing in football. I've been in dressing rooms before when the assistant's saying the total opposite to the manager. That's not how things work.
What, basically trying to get their job?
I wouldn't say per se trying to get their job, but not being aligned with what the manager is. Now, don't get me wrong, at times when I was assistant at Livingston, I didn't agree with some things that David would say. Right. But the players would never know that. But I would say to him in the office, "Oh, Gaffer, I don't agree with that," or "Gaffer, I don't agree with that." But as far as the players are aware, I was totally agreeing with what the manager was saying, and that's the way it needs to work, you know. But I have been in dressing rooms as well as a player when the assistant manager's saying one thing or the opposite to what the manager's saying, and they're not aligned.
That's confusing for a player.
It's confusing, but I think it also shows that there's not the bond there that there should be. You know, there's a sense of loyalty in the game where that is your job as an assistant. So if you've got something to take up with the manager, take it up with the manager, not with the players, because that's not the way that things should work. You're not giving everyone the best opportunity to achieve, and if you don't align with the manager at all, then don't do the job. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, as I said, no matter what my role is, what I understand the remits of a coach, assistant manager, and obviously ultimately if you're the manager. So yeah, that's my plan, to get back in there and then, as I said, just do things to the best of my ability and see what happens.
Out of personal curiosity, if you could manage any team in the world, which one would you take on?
Who's the richest? Yeah, probably Arsenal.
Really?
Yeah, growing up being an Arsenal fan, you know, that would probably be the one that if I could pick any team, I'd probably pick them.
Good time for it as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So the last thing that I want to talk about, and this is, I don't know if I should talk to you about it, if this is something you want to talk about, is the kind of racism in football.
Yeah, no, go on.
Because you spoke to Craig Fallon and stuff. I just wanted to kind of, if that's okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, if you just kind of able to tell me, because it's such a, you know, people put it to the back of their minds until an incident comes up.
Yeah.
And they act like it's not really a part of the modern game, but it is.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to know more about your experience in the game with dealing with racism.
Yeah, I think it's part of modern society. You know, I always say the same thing. I think social media has a lot to answer for. I think it got a lot worse during lockdown, and there's this thing, freedom of speech. You know, that this line has just been blurred. You know, I've faced it as a player, like somebody recording and, you know, then it going online and then it being shared, etc., etc. I've had it on social media where people have typed stuff. But for me, it's one of those things. And the first couple of times it happened, as I said, you know, the first time someone had written something after playing in Edinburgh Derby, we'd won the game, and you know, it takes you back. It really, really does. I remember reading it when I got in the dressing room after winning the game. I was delighted we were meant to go out, and you see it and you break down as a player. You know, this is me, a 29-year-old, 30-year-old man. I then had the one where it was recorded. Again, it takes you back to that really, really dark place. And the thing is, people who maybe write these things or record is totally different, but people who write these things probably don't understand the effect it does have on the individual, rather, or their families. So I remember writing back to the guy, and then, you know, to and fro, and then he said, "Oh, you know, a couple of months later, I didn't actually realise what I had written, how bad it sounds, until the guy had recorded and racially abused me." And I said, "Yeah," well, I said, well, "This is the thing, because you'll write it and you'll hit send, and then you'll go downstairs and then you have your dinner and then you go back upstairs and then you do whatever you're doing." But for me, that sits with me for a long, long time. You know, and the hardest thing for me is when, again, my mum going on social media and seeing it all being sent to her and her bringing me in floods of tears. That's when it really, really hit me, because you always think as an individual, I'm fine, I'll be fine, I can deal with this. But when it affects, you know, the most important person in my life, then that's hard. And she's telling me to come home, and I'm like, you know, I'm not a 16-year-old boy, I'm a 30-year-old man at this point. So it's hard. So all I ask of individuals is when you are saying these things, just know the effect it's going to have on the person that you're kind of saying it to, or, you know, if you're writing it down or whatever else it might be. But as I said, I'm emotionally detached from it now. Really? So yeah, anyone could genuinely, and I'm not saying to people to try this out, but you know, anyone can send anything to me, because I'm emotionally detached from it. Social media and stuff like that. Because, like you said, I say helped, but I've spoken to so many people when they've been through the same thing, and I don't think I can offer any advice if I'm still emotionally attached to these things when they happen. So some people might say, "Oh, that's really sad that he feels that way," but it's just the way I am. It doesn't make me any weaker or stronger as a person. It's just the way I am. So it's a lot easier for me now if it does happen to somebody else and they reach out, that I can speak to them, and because I have a massive support network, you know, whether it be my friends, you know, it happened when I was at Hibs, the football club are fantastic, you know, my family, you know, I've got a huge support network. There's not everyone out there that's like that, you know, and when I did feel, you know, in that kind of dark place, if there had been no one around me to maybe pick me back up, then God knows what happens. And that's the people give me any point in your life. I could have just been made redundant. Anything could have happened. I could be in a real dark place already, and then suddenly something like that happens where people just think, oh, it's just a couple of words, and then you're just like, do you know what? I'm done with this. And that's something that hopefully never happens or never happens again. But when it does, then all of a sudden people come out and say, oh no, what a nice person this guy was. Oh, we're going to do something about it. And I've had meetings with social media companies before, but it will never change. It will never change unless it financially hits them. It will never change, because what people don't understand, like, people create these ghost accounts now to racially abuse you. I got racially abused of someone that actually normally he didn't actually care, but people create these ghost accounts to do so. If you got rid of all ghost accounts off social media, all of a sudden the numbers drop drastically. And we all know the way that you pay for adverts, etc., is, oh, you're going to get 8 million views on this because we've got 16 million people who subscribe to this, whatever it might be. If you then cut that number down, all of a sudden they have to charge you less, so it hits them in the pocket. So it's something that's never going to change in terms of social media tightening up. I remember when I spoke to them, this was years ago, and I said, why don't you have it so people can verify their accounts? And they said, well, we don't want, that's unfair on the people some people can't verify their accounts for whatever reason. Okay, that's fine. I said, well, let me choose that I only want people to interact with me who have verified their accounts. Because then if someone says something to me, they can be held accountable. And so it doesn't mean that the other people can't look at my account or anything else, but they can't comment. They can like a picture if they want. They can't comment, or they can't direct message me. I don't know, we don't think that will work. Well, why not? Well, we all know why it wouldn't work, because all of a sudden people with ghost accounts will just stop using them or just delete them, and the numbers will still drop. So financially, it's still, it doesn't work for them. If there was, more severe penalties for things like this happening, it sounds crazy, it's actually a positive thing for things like this happening for them. Because say, for example, somebody racially abuses me today, and I screenshot it and I put it on, as a tweet or whatever else, say, oh, look what's happened. It gets shared, then the papers pick it up. Then it's almost like free advertisement for them in probably the cruelest of ways. That is just the way the world works.
The way they make their money is engagement.
Of course, exactly. And then the more that's shared, the more people are engaged. The more people will then go and say, oh, let me go and look on his account to see what's happened. The more clicks it gets, etc., etc. So that's what I said. That it's never going to change. I am at ease with that never changing. So that's why I am emotionally detached from it. And as I said, it doesn't happen face to face, because probably easier for me to deal with.
Yeah. But and it's really quite sad, because people experience that playing youth football or academy football, and it's they will experience it online. I don't know, but at least they have you. Do people reach out to you and try and get, or at least they know you're there?
Yeah.
If they wanted to talk about it or get help with it.
Yeah, they do. And listen, it's not just always the victims that reach out. Sometimes, a child will say something to another child, and a parent will reach out. They're probably the hardest ones,
really?
Because, sitting here in front of you as a black man, there's a lot of things that you can dislike about me. You can say, I don't like the way he carries himself, I don't like the way he speaks, I don't like this. But ultimately, I'm a black man. This is just me. This is some of the way I'm born, and I'm proud to be this way, and I see myself no different to you. Do you know what I mean? So when it does happen for the first time, you almost question yourself. And I think that's why my mum got so emotionally involved, because she's brought me into this earth.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I haven't chosen to be here, and I love obviously being here, etc., etc. But I haven't chosen, and I think that's why it hit her so hard, which I understand. But yeah, listen, as I said, it's just one of those things that we try and we'll try and improve. And like you say, my messages are always open, and as I said, people do engage, and I engage back with them, and I try and help. And I say it's been good, but some people who have said racial things in the past, I've also spoken to them as well. And when they probably realise the effect it does have on other people, they think twice about what they've done. And again, that's the positive as well. It's about education, isn't it? That's probably the most important thing. It's about education, but a lot of people use education as an excuse as well. When it happens and you've been on this earth for a long, long time, education really doesn't really work with me.
Yeah. Well, people go oh, I didn't realise that.
Yeah, I didn't realise the effect that I was going to have. I didn't realise this. I didn't realise that. But you say it for a response. One guy said to me, I only said it to try and put you off. And I was like, I don't have my phone on the pitch. Do you know what I mean? So I'm never going to read it until after, mate. So you're not putting me off anything. But it's just an excuse, isn't it, at times?
Away from the social media, do you feel like things are changing in the landscapes you work in, like management and media? Because the representation is not there.
Yeah.
But do you think things are getting better, or there's a long way to go?
Again, it's a difficult one because my outlook on life is that I just do things to the best of my ability. And do you know what? If I went for 100 jobs and I didn't get any of the 100 jobs, I would never come in here and say, I believe it was because I'm a black man. I would say to you, I believe I did that bit wrong. I did that bit wrong. I'd be that. Because I don't have a defeatist attitude. Yeah. And I'm not saying, listen, some people might think that way. I don't have a victim mentality. I just go for things. And if I get them, I get them. If I don't, I don't. And I always look within myself and have I presented myself in the correct way? Because I don't, if I start going in to do things and thinking, I'm not getting put on this show or that show because of the colour of my skin, I might as well give up. Yeah. I might as well give up. And I don't have that within me. That's not where I sit now. So it's probably a question I won't be able to answer again until I'm back on that beach. And I look back and have a look, because at this moment in time, it doesn't, barriers are there to be knocked down. Yeah. People told me, when I was trying to come through and be a manager, older pros were saying to me, you won't, being a black man, you won't be able to do it. And I was like, well, what coaching badges do you have? I don't have my coaching badges. So your argument's weak. It's like me applying for a job as a brain surgeon and I'm not qualified to do so. How can I say, they didn't hire me because I'm a black man? So if I have my pro license and I go for 101 jobs and I don't get any of them, maybe I have to look at something like that. But at this moment in time, that doesn't even enter my mind, if I'm honest.
Well, I am very excited to see you back in management, whatever capacity that may be. Marvin Bartley, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure, mate. Top man.
Thank you.
Cheers, buddy.